Disclaimer: the anti-Alohomora charm cannot stop J.K. Rowling. In a run-down section of London, a telephone box sank into the ground with two teenagers held bound and gagged by two of Voldemort's deadliest followers inside. "You've made a lot of trouble for the Dark Lord, Potter," Lucius Malfoy said cordially. "It would have been a lot easier if you'd just followed the visions he was sending you. Luckily, you were expelled, and we knew that there would be one night where you were traveling late. It was child's play to get you two alone." Harry made a muffled sound that, from its inflection, sounded like words that even Sirius wouldn't let him say in front of him. Hermione tried to ignore how likely she was to die in the next hour, and did her best to calm herself with every occlumency technique she knew. Her mind raced through the possibilities. She had enough room to maneuver that if she turned the right way, she might be able to get her hand into her skirt to reach the homemade wand tucked into her garter belt. But what could she do with it? It was pointing straight down at her foot with no more than an inch to move it. She'd have to vanish the ropes that bound her before she could do anything else, and they'd notice instantly. Could she do anything with her wand pointed where it was? She could break her foot, but that would just make matters worse. She couldn't curse the lift without knowing what would happen to it. An area effect spell? Not pointing down. It would have to affect the air somehow. Wait, could that do it? She was in an enclosed space, a small one. She was pretty sure it would, but she'd have to pull it off before they reached the atrium. There was nothing for it, she'd have to try. She was sure she was dead otherwise, and at least this spell was her territory. Hermione concentrated even harder on her occlumency, trying to clear her mind of all emotion. As quickly as she could, she worked her fingers into her skirt at an angle she hoped the Death Eaters wouldn't notice. Her fingers found the butt of her hold-out wand and gripped it just enough to slide it in a complex pattern. Beneath the gag, she focused and whispered the words she had devised as best she could. "Eris ecto meris nitron!" And she held her breath. With great effort, she felt magic surge down her arm and through her hold-out wand. Around her, the air began to change, the very molecules rearranging themselves, the double and triple bonds of oxygen and nitrogen breaking and new ones forming. In the small lift compartment, the oxygen levels dropped precipitously, and the level of another molecule that Hermione was very familiar with rose. Nitrous oxide. This was quite possibly the most dangerous thing she'd ever done, and that included facing off against a millennium-old basilisk. Nitrous oxide was rapidly intoxicating, and could asphyxiate you if you weren't careful. If she was caught by the Death Eaters and prevented from reversing the spell when it had done its work, she would pass out, and maybe die. If she accidentally breathed in a lungful of the stuff, she would pass out, and maybe die. If she couldn't break out of her bonds fast enough, she would pass out, and maybe die. And if they got to the atrium too fast and got fresh air, the Death Eaters would recover, and would definitely kill her. Looking beside her, she saw Harry and the two Death Eaters swaying and looking around dizzily. Harry's eyes widened in fear as he couldn't understand why he suddenly felt lightheaded and was losing his grip on reality. Lucius Malfoy saw this and correctly concluded that Hermione was the cause. He spun around and brandished his wand at her. What did you do?" he managed to say, before his eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed to the floor. McNair went down next, and Harry on top of him a couple of seconds later. Hermione immediately stopped the molecular rearrangement spell and used her precious air to whisper, "Evanesco! Evanesco! Evanesco!" behind her gag. She only had a minute or two before Harry suffered brain damage from the asphyxia, and she didn't know how long she had before they reached the atrium. "Evanesco!" She pushed harder. Snap! The ropes vanished. Pulling her hold-out wand as fast as she could, she ripped off the gag and shouted, "E Publio!" She took a deep breath. Fresh air. The bubblehead charm held. She cast it a second time on Harry and tried to haul him up, but she knew it would be some time before he was conscious again. "Come on, Harry, wake up, wake up!" she grunted as she tried to lift his arm onto her shoulders. "Reintegrate!" Huh? What? He blinked and looked around groggily. She supposed she should be happy the spell did that much.
Oh, never mind.
She sorted her priorities and dropped him again, instead turning to rifle through the Death Eater's pockets. She quickly found Harry's wand, and her too. After another moment's thought, she picked up Malfoy's and McNair's wands where they had dropped them on the floor. With a whole handful of wands in one hand, she lifted Harry up again just in time. Ding! The doors opened, and they spilt out into the atrium. Hermione pulled Harry out of the lift. He was on his feet now, but just barely. She didn't think she could pull the two men out to get back to the surface, so she decided to try the flues, but before they could reach them, she heard a haunting feminine voice shout,
"They're loose! Stop them!"
Dark curses flew through the air, but just as quickly the woman shouted again,
"Not that way! We need Potter alive! Wall them in and call for backup!"
Before Hermione could react, the woman had created a wall of fire around them as casually as if she were lighting a candle. Hermione spun around, searching for an escape. Where did she get that kind of power? The fire didn't even trap them in a circle. It spread down the floor of the atrium past the flue banks, creating a path for them to reach the building lifts. The woman was toying with them. Hermione ran, pulling Harry with her. With no other options, they ran into the nearest lift, hoping they could take it up to a different floor, but it was no use. As soon as they were inside, a spell struck the lift, and it fell with a horrible lurch as if the cable had snapped, dropping them violently down to level 9. Harry took the initiative then and tried the stairs down to the courtrooms, but the way was barred, leaving the only escape forward into the Department of Mysteries itself. They kept running, and Hermione used one of her wands to tap out a message on her ring in Morse code. SOS at Ministry, HJG, HJP. At number 12 Grimmauld Place, 4 people who were sleepily waiting for Harry to return for the night grew suddenly alert as nearly forgotten gold-plated rings on their hands began to heat up. They looked down and saw the made-up symbols had morphed into English letters and were glowing bright red.
"SOS?"
Molly Weasley said.
"What's SOS?"
"It's a Muggle code for boats," Arthur said cheerfully. Then his face fell as he added, It means save our ship."
"It's a universal call for help,"
Remus clarified. Sirius put 2 and 2 together.
"Crap, that means Harry's in trouble at the Ministry."
He shot off a firecracker with his wand.
"Code red! Code red!" he yelled. "Assemble the troops!"
At 93 Diagon Alley, 3 teenage boys were sprawled across various pieces of furniture, finally passed out from a late night working to prepare the shop. Suddenly, 2 of them jerked awake, trying to make sense of the sudden burning sensation on their hands.
"Fred,"
George said blearily,
"SOS is a call for help, isn't it?"
"I think so," Fred replied.
"Oh, that's bad, isn't it?"
"Yeah." George stood up and kicked the third boy a little too hard.
"Oi, Lee, wake up!"
he said. "Bugger off! What for?" Lee Jordan groaned.
"'Cause my girlfriend's in trouble and we've got to save her."
A couple minutes' work had Lee on his feet, and they grabbed their brooms and took off across the London skies. Septim Vector was trying to corral the excited fifth-years back into their dorms and clean up the mess that had been made of things during the astronomy exam. With Minerva gone, she had volunteered to lead the Gryffindors back up to their tower. She looked down in surprise when her finger started burning. She tried to make sense of the message, and couldn't.
"It must be something Muggle," she thought. "Hermione must know what it means."
She ran through the list of Muggle-born students in her mind.
"Mr. Thomas!"
she called out. The black boy in the line turned around and looked at her.
"Mr. Thomas, what does SOS mean?"
"SOS? You mean
The distress call?"
he said in confusion.
"SOS is a distress call?"
she said, to be clear.
"Yeah, everyone knows that, Professor."
"Oh, Merlin, no!" she breathed. Cedric Diggory was woken from his bed by the ring. A few minutes racking his brain yielded no information about what the message meant, but he knew it had to be important. Hermione wouldn't have sent it otherwise, especially at this hour. A few more minutes of shaking and prodding informed him that no one else in the house knew what SOS meant either, but he had a bad feeling his friend was in trouble. Harry stared at his ring stupidly, still trying to snap out of his daze. "What happened?" he said.
"I rearranged the air molecules into nitrous oxide,"
Hermione said.
What? Later, Harry. What is this place?
Harry looked up and saw a whirlwind of blue streaks spinning around them. After a few moments it slowed and came to a stop, resolving itself into a circular room with a dozen doors spaced around it with eerie blue torches. "What the hell?" he said.
"Well, what is it?"
Hermione demanded. "How should I know?"
"You're the one who was having visions of the Department of Mysteries."
"I only saw the one door. I don't know what this is."
"Oh, fine. Just pick one."
She chose a door at random and shoved it open.
"Come on, we need to hide until help comes."
They entered a short hallway that led into what looked like some kind of ritual room. A large file burned in one corner. The opposite corner held a water fountain. A third contained a small tornado in the largest bell jar she'd ever seen, which stretched to the ceiling. And the fourth, she wasn't quite sure how to describe it. It looked like a constantly shifting pile of moving rock. Floating above a large circle in the middle of the room was a large, vaguely spherical region of soft, glowing light with no identifiable source. Various doors lined the edges of this room as well.
"Well, that's interesting,"
she said. She was starting to get an idea of what mysteries were studied here. "Are they still coming?" Harry asked. Hermione turned and looked at the door. She raised her wand and was about to cast a locking spell at it, but she realized that might tip them off to where they'd gone.
"We can't stay here,"
she said. She found Harry's wand in her robes and handed it to him along with Lucius Malfoy's unusually long one.
"Here, now you'll have two. Come on."
She ran around to the door between the fire and earth and opened it. She was blasted in the face by scalding heat and an intense smell of brimstone. She caught a glimpse of a room filled with molten lava before she slammed the door shut.
"Not that one! Not that one!"
she said as she backed away.
"Wait a minute. If fire and earth make lava, then earth and water—"
She opened the appropriate door. Inside was a muddy swamp, much fancier than George's and Fred's version, complete with miniature trees somehow growing in the dim light. She got an idea.
"Harry, in here!"
He rushed to follow her. She randomly cast
"Avolier"
at 3 other doors in the apparent alchemy room before ducking into the swamp and sealing that one too.
"That should buy us some more time,"
she said, though she thought she might need to invent a stronger locking spell. The Death Eaters would probably know how to get through the standard anti-Alohomora charm.
"Harry, I need some wood."
Harry broke a branch off a tree and handed it to her. "They want me to get the prophecy for them, don't they?" he said morosely. "Dumbledore said Voldemort wanted to lure me here, but he couldn't because I lent occlumency."
"Uh-huh."
Hermione grunted non-committally as she worked. "Dumbledore wanted me to stay at Grimmauld Place. It wasn't even that bad. I just had to go out to take my owls."
"Uh-huh."
"But why did Stan attack us? That doesn't make any sense."
"Uh-huh."
"Hermione, are you listening?" She looked up from her work.
"What?"
"What are you doing?"
"Sorry, I was setting a trap. The first Death Eater to come through that door will be in for a lot of pain."
"What if it's an Order member, though?" Harry asked. Hermione frowned and bit her lip. She'd just spent a lot of valuable time stretching carbon nanotube threads a fraction of a millimeter wide tight across the doorframe. Super strong and nearly invisible, they wouldn't be able to cut clean through a human body, but they would cut fast and deep through skin and muscle, and they wouldn't discriminate friend from foe. Deciding she didn't want to remove it, she tapped another message on her ring. "Watch out for tripwires." "Watch out for tripwires?" Cedric said in confusion. "That definitely means something's wrong. I'm telling you, Dad, we've got to do something." All right, son. Calm down. I'll call up the R's." They had just picked their way across the swamp to another wall of doors on the other side when Hermione stopped.
"Oh, I'm being stupid," she said. "Dobby!"
Nothing happened.
"Dobby!"
she called again. Still nothing. "Maybe he can't get through the wards?" Harry suggested.
"Maybe, but I didn't think wizards were that smart. Well, I suppose the Unspeakables might be."
"Just keep moving," Harry said. He tried one of the doors at the back of the room. This one led into what looked like a mine, but a mine gleaming with every kind of rock, mineral, and metal imaginable.
"No, too confined,"
Hermione said. She was starting to get a feel for the layout of the place, assuming the geometry wasn't magically screwed up, which was entirely possible.
Besides, this one here takes us further from the entrance. She tried the door she pointed out.
A rainforest.
Huh.
They went with it, but she soon began to think that door wasn't a good idea. The next few doors began shunting her and Harry around the circle of the Department of Mysteries rather than deeper into its recesses. Each of these rooms contained a different miniature habitat in it, from forest to desert and everything in between. This must be a different division of the department, presumably one studying life. Hermione set a couple more tripwires across some of the doors, albeit simpler ones, but they were sure the Death Eaters were searching the department by now, so they had to keep moving. They finally stopped in what seemed to be the deepest chamber of the Life Division, a 20-yard square of volcanic ash field with flowers just starting to poke through it. There were 3 doors in and out of the room: desert, scrubland, and some kind of laboratory containing boxes full of various insects. Hermione placed nanotube tripwires against the scrubland door for good measure, hopefully leaving them an escape route regardless of which way the Death Eaters came in. They hid behind a rock in the back of the room to rest.
"That's all I've got,"
she said with a sigh. She was panting from the exertion.
"I don't suppose you've invented any interesting spells in the arithmancy class, Harry?"
"Me? I'm not you, Hermione," he said. "I've only covered the basics and what you've taught me. Since when can you rearrange molecules?"
"Since March. That's the power I thought Voldemort couldn't figure out. Damn it, I should have taught you them sooner. I was going to do it when we had our owls out of the way. Well, no time now. They must still be looking for us, unless help's come already and they're fighting them."
"Maybe the Order will win," Harry said, optimistically. "How will we know it's safe to come out, though?"
"They can send me messages,"
she said, and she showed him her ring. It was flashing 2 different messages: "On our way, RJL," and "Coming to help, GFW."
"At least we know they're coming. I'd say I wish the twins would stay out of it, but I think we need all the help we can get. God only knows what's going on with Septima right now, though."
It had taken a while for Septima to figure out who was still close with Hermione in the castle. Dumbledore and his confidants were gone, except Snape, whom she wasn't sure about. Hermione's boyfriend was gone. Only the 2 youngest Weasleys were close enough that she felt confident approaching them. When she showed them her ring, Ronald looked at the message and, once assured it was genuine, went to fetch Ginevra. Ginevra freaked out when she saw the message, and the 2 of them began a hushed conversation that Septima didn't fully understand, but it was something to the effect that Snape was the only person in the castle they could talk to, and they trusted him even less than she did.
"Can you get a hold of Auror Tonks, Professor?" Ronald asked. "She'd be able to help." "If I can get out of the castle, yes, but the hard part will be getting past the headmistress."
A hard look crossed Ginevra's face, which made Septima certain she was going to regret this.
"We'll take care of her, Professor," she said. "Ron, do you have your gallon?"
Septima was surprised again to see Ronald pull out a gallon, which Minerva snatched and began using yet another protean charm to send the message.
"Harry and Herm in danger. Come to 2GH." "Just a moment, I didn't mean,"
Septima admonished. But it was too late. By the time they got back down to the Great Hall, she was being swept along for the ride. A couple dozen students, mostly 5th years and from all 4 houses, had gathered together to face off against the headmistress. Septima wasn't sure how, but Umbridge already had all 5 of the 5th year Inquisitorial Squad members, plus Filch and Snape, there to back her up.
"Why, Professor Vector," Umbridge said haughtily, "whatever are you doing?" "Mr. Potter and Miss Granger have been kidnapped, Dolores, presumably by Death Eaters."
"And you can't deny about them," Ronald interrupted. "Everyone knows about the Azkaban breakout."
"That will do, Mr. Weasley," Septima said. "I was merely going to inform the R's of the incident, but as you can see, their friends were rather angry about the situation and took matters into their own hands." "Kidnapped, you say?" Umbridge said. "I wouldn't trust any lies those 2 miscreants tell you, Professor Vector."
"Harry and Hermione aren't liars," Ronald jumped in.
"We all believe them," said Parvati Patil. "They know their stuff better than you," Tracy Davis spoke up.
Umbridge spotted the 2 Slytherin girls and gaped at them. To be fair, Tracy's friend was admonishing her as well.
Miss Davis, Miss Greengrass, what do you think you're doing? The headmistress demanded. Taking a stand, Professor, Tracy said. Draco Malfoy sneered at them. With Potter? No, with good teaching, Malfoy, Daphne said. We actually learnt something from those two. Wait till we're the only ones who pass our defense owls. So you admit to being members of Potter's group? Umbridge crowed triumphantly. It doesn't matter if you expel us now, Professor, Tracy said. All the important exams are over, and we can always move to France. Umbridge's face fell. I don't know what's come over you girls, she said disappointedly. I asked you to join the Inquisitorial Squad. Tracy rolled her eyes. I would have been more interested if you could actually teach, ma'am, she said. And I owe Hermione a favor on behalf of my sister, Daphne said, being more careful to position herself. Severus stepped out of the shadows where he had been lurking. I strongly suggest you return to your common room, Miss Davis, Miss Greengrass, he said silkily. We will discuss this later. And the rest of you, he addressed the students, you believe this story that Potter and Granger have been captured? He fixed his eyes on Septima and the Weasley pair in turn. Yeah, was the shout of a lot of the students. I don't condone the students' disruption, Severus, Septima said, staring back at him. But as I have said before, I have every faith in Hermione Granger. She sent me a clear call for help not long ago. Now, if you'll excuse me... I'm afraid I can't let you leave, Septima, Umbridge interrupted. Septima drew herself up as much as she could. I think you'll find that you can't drag me about by the ear like you can the students, Dolores. I don't have to stay here. I think you do, Septima. Your activities tonight are highly suspicious and demand immediate investigation. At that, Ginny jumped in front of her. Oi, she said to get out of the bloody way, she yelled and pulled her wand on Umbridge. The Inquisitorial Squad drew theirs, but Ginny wasn't deterred. This is your fault, Umbitch! You made Harry and Hermione go home alone at 2 a.m, and now they've been captured by Death Eaters. That is a lie, Umbridge hissed. It's not, said Neville Longbottom. We've had enough of you, shouted Ron, and the rest of the DA drew their wands as well. Septima backed away out of the line of fire. This was every teacher's worst nightmare. Completely losing control of the students because they'd utterly stopped caring about authority. She couldn't stop several dozen angry teenagers with wands if her life depended on it. That their ire was directed against Dolores was small comfort. Any true breakdown of order at Hogwarts would be a disaster. Professor Snape, do something, Umbridge said. Miss Weasley, I insist you cease this insurrection at once. You will gain nothing from it. We will as soon as Umbridge and her goons step aside, Professor, she said. We're not letting our friends down. Miss Weasley, you don't need to, Septima tried to intervene. I will not stand aside, Umbridge growled. Restrain them. Miss Weasley, Septima repeated. But it was too late. Ginevra raised her wand high in the air and shouted, Dumbledore's army! Dumbledore's army! The rest of the students yelled. Umbridge's eyes widened in horror as hexes started flying through the air. She barely had time to throw up a shield. Stop them! She yelled. The Inquisitorial Squad were already hexing back, but they were outnumbered 4-1. Dumbledore's army made short work of them. Umbridge was doing better, blocking the spells being shot directly at her and throwing back some of her own. Septima hadn't thought she could duel that well. A spell from an indeterminate source threw open the main doors of the castle as Umbridge was forced back out of the Great Hall. Snape, stop them! She cried. I'm a teacher, headmistress, not a one-man army, Severus called over the crowd. He was shielding himself and no more. Septima thought she saw a smirk cross his face. I will assign detentions once things are under control. Get out of our school! Ronald yelled as the spellfire intensified. Umbridge stumbled back, casting wildly. Ah, no, you're all expelled! She shrieked. Everyone's expelled! I'll bring the ministry down on this place! No! Crucio! Everything stopped. In an instant, the only sound in the Great Hall was the voice of Luna Lovegood, who had caught the randomly thrown curse and had fallen to the floor.
screaming with a sound that would haunt Septima's dreams. Mercifully, the girl was only under the curse for about 3 seconds. Ginevra lunged forward, no doubt to cast something horrible, but Neville Longbottom was faster. He stormed forward in a rage that no one had ever seen from the mild-mannered boy, pointed his wand straight at Umbridge's chest, and shouted, "Bombarda!" The hex hit Umbridge with a sickening crack, and she flew 30 feet through the air like a rag doll, landing in the open doors of the castle, where she lay still. No one spoke for a moment. Draco Malfoy twitched, but Longbottom turned his wand on him in a blink. It was smoking, but neither boy seemed to notice. "You want some, Malfoy?" he hissed. Draco wisely backed down. Ginevra, who probably would have done something even worse to Umbridge had Neville not beat her to it, ran forward to check on her friend. "Are you all right, Luna?" she said, cradling her head. "That was most unpleasant," the girl murmured. Ginevra sighed. "Thank you, Neville," she said. "Any time." Everyone else was still staring at Umbridge, not sure how to react. She had always been so careful to operate within the law, as unjust as it was, that it was all the more shocking to finally see her slip. How had it come to this? Septima wondered. Dolores had always been a nasty woman, but she hadn't believed her foolish enough to cast illegal spells, even under pressure. It was then that Septima decided to take charge. Perhaps she could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. She calmly walked towards her old roommate, bent down, and checked the woman's pulse. Still alive. She couldn't help feeling a twinge of disappointment. Probably a few broken ribs, though, and a concussion. She stood up straight and looked at the crowd. "I will take Madame Umbridge to St. Mungo's," she said. "I will also speak with the Aurors about this," she nodded significantly to the Weasleys, "and you may rest assured that she will not be headmistress or hold any other position at Hogwarts any longer. Under the circumstances, I believe Professor Flitwick will fill the role of acting headmaster for the time being." There was a brief silence, and then the great hall erupted in cheers. Harry and Hermione were still hiding behind the rock in the ash field when they heard a crash and a scream.
"Ah! I'm going to kill that mudblood!"
They looked up and saw 2 Death Eaters running in from the Scrubland room. One was bleeding heavily and his robes half shredded.
"There they are! Reducto!"
Harry and Hermione cast stunning spells behind them and started to run.